I believe that education should be fun and engaging for all students. I believe that a classroom should be a safe, supportive, and inclusive learning environment in which all students feel like they have a right to learn and feel welcome. I believe that teacher-learner relationships plays a crucial role in education, as a teacher is such an important and influential person in a student's life. I believe that feedback should have two components. It should have comments in which students can use to improve their learning on, and it should also have positive comments which encourages students to keep trying through motivation and achievement. I believe that classroom management should play a focus on positive reinforcements rather than punishment. This way it encourages positive behaviour. Through a constructivist approach, I also believe that students construct their own knowledge about the world through both their experiences and their social interactions with their peers. I can demonstrate an understanding of the purpose of providing timely and appropriate feedback to students about their learning. At the start of this year, I did a placement at a low socio-economic school and I took a literacy lesson on summarising. I had about 20 students in my class, all in grades 6 to 8, and the learning intention was that the students understood how to write an effective summary. The lesson started off with me reading One Shot Toothpaste by Paul Jennings to the students. And while I was doing this, they were to write down who, what, when, where, and why happened throughout the story to get the key details and events. A class summary was then created on the board to model to the students how to create one. Students then went back to their desks and created a summary by themselves, which had to be at least between 6 and 8 lines. Throughout this, I was giving feedback to the students to ensure that they understood the requirements of the task. My feedback was appropriate as it directly related to the task, and it was also timely as it was given to the students as they were doing the task, and it also took the form of short conversations so that feedback could be given to all students. My feedback included both positive and negative comments, such as, I really love the way that you have included details, but you just need to say what happened at the very end of the story because you haven't got what happened from the start to the finish. That way, it gives them a sense of motivation and achievement because you've pointed out something that they've done right. But it also gives them something to work on and improve because you've also pointed out something that they could improve on. Throughout this lesson, the students learned that including detail and events that happen from the start to the finish is the most effective way to write a summary. And I also learned that short conversations are the best way to give feedback to students. That way you're still mentioning something that they can improve on. You're still giving them something as in a positive comment that they've done right. But this way, because it's only short and gets straight to the point, you can give feedback to everybody. This lesson links to my belief that feedback should be both positive and negative at the same time, because that's what I did throughout my feedback. I'd say something that the students did really good first, and then I'd just add in something at the end that they can improve on. That way, they're not just getting negative feedback, which discourages them, and they're not just getting positive feedback because they can still have something to work on by giving them that. This lesson also links to my belief that feedback should be used to motivate students, as by giving them something positive through feedback, it motivates them to keep doing it because they feel a sense of achievement. It also links to my belief that feedback should be consistent and often, as the students were given feedback at the start of the lesson on how good they were at listening to me reading the story. They were given feedback on how good they participated in the class discussion and the class summary of what happened in the story, and they're also given feedback at the end of the lesson through their own personal summaries of One Shot Toothpaste by Paul Jennings. I can use curriculum, assessment, and reporting knowledge to design lesson sequences and lesson plans. During my last placement, one requirement was that I had to create a unit of work. I created a pre-algebra/algebra unit of work. I had to create a pre-test which would also be used as a post-test. I used my curriculum knowledge to do this as I looked at the skills that were needed from levels 1 to 9 in the number and algebra strand of the LSVALs, and I used this to create my test and all the questions that were on it. The students were then given the test, and then I had to analyse all the learning gaps of 80 students from 4 mentor classes and place them in 5 different groups for algebra based on what skills they already had and what skills they needed improving on, again using my curriculum knowledge. I was given the middle group, and it was about 18 students in that group. The learning intentions for those groups was that they needed to understand how rules works for patterns. So they needed to learn how to find a rule and then use this rule to create and complete patterns. And then they also needed to understand that variables can represent numbers and be able to solve these variables. I had one lesson on patterns and I had 2 lessons on variables. I started each lesson with explicitly teaching the students the skills that they needed to know, such as how to find a rule or how to solve to find the value of a variable. I then gave multiple examples to demonstrate how to use this skill in an equation. The students were then given questions to independently do while I went around the room and offered assistance and scaffolding to those students that needed it. Throughout this unit, the students learnt how to create rules and how to find rules to create and complete patterns, and they also learnt that variables represent numbers and how to solve these. This was shown by the data from their post-test. I used curriculum knowledge as I implemented questions from AusVals, and I also looked at AusVals to determine the content that was going to be in my lesson based off what skills the students should learn at their level and what level they were actually up to. I used reporting knowledge as I gave the students back their data so that they could understand where they were at their learning and what skills they had and what skills they still needed developing. And I used assessment knowledge as I assessed the students' tests to see what learning gaps they had, and I used this to inform my planning. I also, again, used assessment knowledge by assessing the post-test to see what learning had occurred. This unit links to my belief about assessment, as I believe that assessment should be used to help students learn. Harlan was a big influence on me, as they said that assessment should have the ultimate goal to improve student learning, which is what I now believe about assessment. I also believe that each lesson should have some type of assessment in it, whether it's just formative assessment. My unit aligned with this, as my lessons had formative assessment in the way of questions. I used these questions to see what students understood, and if they didn't, to mend my teaching to help the students understand better. I can demonstrate knowledge of practical approaches to manage challenging behaviour. Throughout the year on my placement rounds, I've attended 2 separate professional development sessions on the school-wide positive behaviour support approach. Throughout these sessions, I have learnt what it is, how it works, and that it focuses on positive reinforcement to encourage positive behaviour rather than punishment. This approach has been influential on my beliefs about behaviour management, as I think that positive reinforcement is a much more effective way of managing behaviour than punishment. As punishment can jeopardise teacher-student relationships, positive reinforcement will only maintain these further, as the students will appreciate the respect you give them for thanking them and noticing that they're doing the right thing, and also rewarding you for them, whereas they're just not going to like being yelled at for doing the wrong thing, whether they deserve it or not. I also have the knowledge as I have observed my mentor teachers using their practical approaches to manage challenging behaviour. It's similar to the school-wide positive behaviour support, as they also reinforce positive behaviour, and they don't yell at students for doing something wrong. Rather, they use an assertive tone and they say please and thank you whenever the students do something right or they want them to do something, treating the students with respect. And I also think this is a very effective way of behaviour management, so I have adopted this technique. An example of this is in a maths lesson where I took 8 students out into a room to complete worksheets on perimeter. The learning intention was that the students could calculate perimeter and understood what it was. Throughout the lesson, I had 2 boys that kept distracting each other, and hence they kept distracting the whole group. So I just said to one of the boys, "Can you please move until you can stop distracting everybody else?" And he moved, and after a while, he asked me, "Hey, can I move back?" And I said, "You can move back if you keep doing your work for a little bit longer and finish that page of questions, and if you promise not to distract anybody else because it's not fair to them." So about 5 minutes later, he hadn't distracted anybody else, and so I said, "Okay, since you've been good, you can move back." Therefore, I used a positive reinforcement approach because I thanked him and showed my appreciation of him doing the right thing, and he also got rewarded for doing the right thing because he got to move back to his seat with his friends. The students learned that when they do the right thing, they're going to get rewarded for it, and that I'm always going to show them respect for doing the right thing regardless. And I learned that, focusing on positive things is such a more effective way of managing behavior than focusing on the negative. And it's going to help maintain relationships so much more. And this links to my belief, because I believe that teacher-student relationships should be maintained at all time. And I believe that focusing on positive reinforcement is going to help do that a lot better than focusing on negative and focusing on punishing the students for doing something wrong. This also links to my belief that I don't think the students should ever be yelled at aggressively, and I think that using an assertive tone is a much more effective way of getting the students to do something, because if you're getting yelled at, you're not going to want to do what that person says. Rather, if you're talking to a person in a polite yet assertive manner, just asserting your authority, saying, hey, I'm the boss, you have to listen to me, but I'm going to show you respect about it. I think that's such a much more effective way of managing behavior, as the student's going to respond so much better than being yelled at.